There is a scrapyard near Edward's station. It is full of rusty old cars and machinery. They are brought there to be broken up. The pieces are loaded into freight cars, and Edward pulls them to the steelworks where they are melted down and used again. One day, Edward saw a traction engine in the scrapyard. "Hello," he said. "You're not broken and rusty. What are you doing there?" "I'm Trevor," said the traction engine sadly. "They're going to break me up next week." "What a shame," said Edward. "My driver says I only need some paint, brasso, and oil to be as good as new." Trevor went on sadly. "But it's no good. My master doesn't want me. I suppose it's because I'm old-fashioned." Edward snorted indignantly. "People say I'm old-fashioned, but I don't care. Sir Topham Hatt," these pages are so dry, "says I'm a useful engine." "My driver says I'm useful too," replied Trevor. "I sometimes feel ill, but I don't give up like these tractors. I struggle on and finish the job. I've never broken down in my life," he ended proudly. "What work did you do?" asked Edward kindly. "My master would send us from farm to farm. We threshed the corn, hauled the logs, sawed the timber, and did lots of other work. We made friends at all the farms and saw them every year. The children loved to see us come. They followed us in the crowds and watched us all day long. My driver would sometimes give them rides." Trevor shut his eyes, remembering. "I like children," he said simply. "Oh, yes, I like children." "Broken up, what a shame." "Broken up, what a shame," clanked Edward as he went back to work. "I must help Trevor. I must." He thought of the people he knew who liked engines. Edward had lots of friends, but strangely none of them had room for a traction engine at home. "It's a shame. It's a shame," he hissed as he brought his coaches to the station. Then, "Peep, peep," he whistled. "Why didn't I think of him before?" Waiting there on the platform was the very person. It was the vicar. "Morning, Charlie." "Morning, Sid." "Hello, Edward. You look upset." "What's the matter, Charlie?" he asked the driver. "There's a traction engine in the scrapyard, Vicar," the driver said. "He'll be broken up next week, and it's a shame. Jim Cole says he never drove a better engine." "Do save him, sir. You've got room, sir," Edward said. "Yes, Edward, I've got room," laughed the vicar, "but I don't need a traction engine. He'll saw wood and give children rides. Do buy him, sir, please." "We'll see," said the vicar, and climbed into the train. Jim Cole came on Saturday afternoon. "The Reverend's coming to see you, Trevor. Maybe he'll buy you." "Do you think he will?" asked Trevor hopefully. "He will when I've lit your fire and cleaned you up," said Jim. When the vicar and his two boys arrived in the evening, Trevor was blowing off steam. He hadn't felt so happy for months. "Watch this, Reverend," called Jim, and Trevor chuffed happily about the yard. "Oh, Daddy, do buy him," pleaded the boys, jumping up and down in their excitement. "Now I'll try," said the vicar, climbing up beside Jim. "Show your paces, Trevor," he said, and drove him about the yard. Then he went into the office and came out smiling. "I've got him cheap, Jim, cheap." "Do you hear that, Trevor?" cried Jim. "The Reverend saved you, and you'll live at the vicarage now." "Peep, peep," whistled Trevor happily. "Will you drive him home for me, Jim, and take these scallywags with you? They won't want to come in the car when there's a traction engine to ride on." Trevor's home in the vicarage orchard is close to the railway, and he sees Edward every day. His paint is spotless, and his brass shines like gold. He saws firewood in winter, and Jim sometimes borrows him when a tractor fails. Trevor likes doing his old jobs, but his happiest day is the church fete when, then, with a long wooden seat bolted to his bunker, he chuffs round the orchard, giving rides to children. Long afterwards, you will see him shut his eyes, remembering, "I like children," he whispers happily. One day, James had to wait at Edward's station till Edward and his train came in. This made him cross. "Late again," he shouted. Edward only laughed, and James fumed away. "Edward is impossible," he grumbled to the others. "He clanks about like a lot of old iron, and he is so slow he makes us wait." Thomas and Percy were indignant. "Old iron," they snorted. "Slow! Why, Edward could beat you in a race any day." "Really," said James huffily, "I should like to see him do it." One day, James's driver did not feel well when he came to work. "I'll manage," he said, but when they reached the top of Gordon's Hill, he could hardly stand. The fireman drove the train to the next station. He spoke to the signalman, put the coaches in a siding, and uncoupled James ready for shunting. Then he helped the driver over to the station and asked them to look after him and find a relief. Suddenly, the signalman shouted, and the fireman turned round and saw James puffing away. He ran hard, but he couldn't catch James, and soon came back to the signal box. The signalman was busy. "All traffic halted," he announced at last. "Up and down. Main lines are clear for 30 miles, and the inspector's coming." The fireman mopped his face. "What happened?" he asked. "Two boys were on the footplate. They tumbled off when James started. I shouted at them, and they ran like rabbits." "Just let me catch them," said the fireman grimly. "I'll teach them to meddle with my engine." Both men jumped as the telephone rang. "Yes," answered the signalman. "He's here." "Right. I'll tell him. The inspector's coming at once in Edward. He wants a shunter's pole and a coil of wire rope." "What for?" wondered the fireman. "Search me, but you better get them quickly." The fireman was ready and waiting when Edward arrived. The inspector saw the pole and rope. "Good man," he said. "Jump in." We'll catch him, puffed Edward, crossing to the up line in pursuit. James was laughing as he left the yard. "What a lark! What a lark!" he chuckled to himself. Presently he missed his driver's hand on the regulator, and then he realized there was no one in his cab. "What shall I do?" he wailed. "I can't stop. Help! Help!" "We're coming! We're coming!" Edward was panting up behind with every ounce of steam he had. With a great effort, he caught up and crept alongside, slowly gaining till his smoke box was level with James's buffer beam. "Steady, Edward." The inspector stood on Edward's front, holding a noose of rope in the crook of the shunter's pole. He was trying to slip it over James's buffer. The engine swayed and lurched. He tried again and again. More than once he nearly fell, but just saved himself. At last! "Got him!" he shouted. He pulled the noose tight and came back to the cab safely. Gently braking so as not to snap the rope, Edward's driver checked the engine's speed, and James's fireman scrambled across and took control. The engines puffed back side by side. "So the old iron caught you after all," chuckled Edward. "I'm sorry," whispered James. "Thank you for saving me." "That's all right. You were splendid, Edward." Sir Topham Hatt was waiting and thanking the men warmly. "A fine piece of work," he said. "James, you can rest and then take your train. I'm proud of you, Edward. You shall go to the works and have your worn parts mended." "Oh, thank you, sir," said Edward happily. "It'll be lovely not to clank." The two naughty boys were soon caught by the police, and their fathers walloped them soundly. They were also forbidden to watch trains till they could be trusted. James's driver soon got well in the hospital and is now back to work. James missed him very much, but he missed Edward more. And you will be glad to know that when Edward came home the other day, James and all the other engines gave him a tremendous welcome. Sir Topham Hatt thinks he will be deaf for weeks. I think it was a good story. Alex is snoring.
Hi, everybody.